Cal-Am residents. My name is Chef Keith. I'm executive chef of Cal-Am Catering. Today I'm going to do a short rib demonstration, how to cook a bone-in beef short rib. You can use boneless short ribs, but generally in your typical grocery store you're going to find bone-in short ribs. And the reason being is that bone is much better to do with bone-in because you're going to have that bone marrow come out in your sauce. So we're going to get started here. To save a little bit of time today, I did sear off some of my short ribs so I could show you kind of the finished product. I'm just going to get some gloves on. What you want to do when it comes to a short rib is you want to generously season all sides. A little bit of your black pepper is going to come off in your saute pan. In the recipe it does state how to use a large Dutch oven. I didn't have a Dutch oven at my kitchen. I know that typically a lot of you just might. But you don't necessarily have to use that. I'm going to be using what we call in the restaurant hotel pan. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and season all sides. And typically first what you'll want to do is you want to make sure that there's no silver skin. Looks like they cleaned these up pretty good. The silver skin just won't really break down. Short ribs are a little fatty, but boy, they are delicious. So I'm going to get started with a little bit of salt and pepper on all sides. Short rib is a really nice dish. Doesn't take too long in the kitchen. Most of your time is the cooking time. They can typically take anywhere from 2.5 to 4 hours to cook, depending on their thickness. As you can see, I am seasoning all sides. If you want to get a little extra brown on your browning on your short rib, you could dredge it in a little bit of flour. I typically don't use the flour. Most of the time I just get nice color in the saute pan. And as you can see on my skillet here, from searing the first batch, I got some nice brown bits starting there. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my skillet and let it heat up. What I also did was I saved some of that lovely browning fats. As you can see, it's nice and thick. It's because it kind of congealed. So I'm just going to add that back to my pan. Just set it off to the side. I also have a little bit more. Now you don't want to burn your oil, so you want to do this over like a medium-high heat and just adjust your heat as needed. To accompany this today, we're going to serve this with some nice green beans and some mashed potatoes. So you can see here, I went ahead and I seared them on all sides, even the ends. Put a nice sear on the ends. This is going to help them kind of hold their shapes. If you don't sear it, what I always typically find is that the meat is tender, but it just kind of falls all apart. The sear not only adds a lot of flavor to the bottom of your pan, which in turn turns into your sauce, or if you want to make a gravy with it, but it also adds a really nice deep depth flavor to your short rib. I'm just going to set those aside. I'm going to give this a few more minutes to warm up. Okay folks, you can see my pan is starting to get a little bit smoky. It's getting nice and hot. I'm going to turn down the flame a little bit. Like I said, you don't want to really burn your oil or the short ribs. So now that it's nice and hot, I'm going to go ahead and adjust my flame. I'm going to turn it down. I'm going to go ahead and start adding my short ribs. Another good tip is start with your fat side down. Also, what really helps too is if you bring your short ribs out of the fridge about an hour before you're going to sear them, having them at a nice room temperature will help them cook more evenly. You won't cool down your pan as you're putting your short ribs in. And also, Mine are going to brown relatively quick because I have that nice brown oil I seared my first batch. So you definitely want to do this in batches. And you'll see here shortly what I was talking about when your seasoning is going to come off. It's going to come off a little bit in the oil. But at the end, you're going to go ahead and strain this, the juice when it's done. And you can serve it just like it is after you render the fat off the top. Or you can thicken it and turn it into more of a sauce or a gravy. A gravy, you would introduce roux to it. A sauce, you would thicken it with a cornstarch or an arrowroot, something in that manner. You can use potato starch if you, or even arrowroot if you have gluten problems, celiacs, whatnot. What I like to do is I'll move the short rib or whatever I'm searing, I'll move it around to a hot spot every now and again. But you see the importance of not crowding your pan so your short rib or whatever you're searing doesn't start to kind of steam it. You're going to get a lot of fat that comes out of a short rib. So it's going to render off. And that's where I got that lovely, nice brown sauce. What's going to add a lot of flavor to your sauce is your mirepoix, which is your carrot, celery, and onions. That's some red wine, some tomato paste, some fresh garlic, and then our beef broth. And of course, some fresh thyme. You can use fresh thyme, oregano, any of your favorite herbs. But your typical chef would just use a little bit of fresh thyme. In the recipe, I noticed that there was no bay leaf. So I'm going to add a little 3 bay leaves to my pan before I wrap it and put it in the oven. Typically, you want to cook short ribs nice, slow and low over several hours. You get a much better result. And the short rib is just below on the cow where your typical rib roast would come from, your prime rib, whatnot, your beef ribs, kind of just below that area. There's not very many short ribs out of one cow. You only get about 6%. If you don't like fat, short ribs won't be for you. But as they say, fat is flavor. Okay, folks. So I'm all done with the searing process of it. I'm not sure how that looks in your camera, but it's not really burnt. It's got a really nice dark golden brown. I'm going to set my short ribs aside. I'm going to go ahead and pour off 3/4 of this oil. You want to just save a little bit of that in there so when you add your mirepoix. I'm going to turn down my heat. I'm going to let my pan cool off a little bit. And then we're going to start with the garlic. And then we're going to go with the carrots, celery, and onions. This is a really nice dinner. You could even do ahead of time. You can do the day before, a few days before. Say we got Christmas coming up. Go ahead and have it as your Christmas dinner. Something a little bit different. A lot of people do enjoy a nice piece of prime rib or something like that. But it can have some guests over and enjoy just a really nice, elegant dinner. Seems like you've been in the kitchen all day long, but really it only takes you about half hour or so searing, cutting your veg. It does the rest in the oven. So I'm going to go ahead and add my garlic cloves. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't have any real large garlic cloves. I'm going to remove those. So I didn't cut them like the recipe says. I'm just going to give them a quick smash. That's going to open it up and allow them to brown. So I'm using a little bit more than what the recipe says. I think it's like 4 or 5 garlic cloves or so. But mine are kind of small. I use the the inside of my garlic cloves. Here at the kitchen we use quite a bit of fresh garlic, and unfortunately that is what I ended up with. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and add the garlic cloves. Those are already getting nice and brown. A lot of that has to do with the oil that's in the pan. It's already a little brown. So you don't burn your oil. We're going to go ahead and add our our celery, carrots, and onions. It's going to cool your pan down. So as you all know, carrot, celery, and onions typically for your something you would throw in your to make a soup. Pretty much the same basis here. You're just cooking some a different type of meat. Yeah, short ribs are really, really good cut of meat, but you gotta like fat. One of the big complaints in, say, a restaurant or whatnot that I've worked in was they're so fatty. Well, if you don't know what a short rib is, those are the types of people that you'll hear that from. This type of cooking, it's all about adding the layers, flavor layers. And in total, I believe I have about 6 pounds of short ribs is what I bought today. The first 3 short ribs that I demonstrated for you was about almost 2 pounds. And then the other 4 that I seared prior to the video was another a total of up to about 6 pounds of short ribs. I believe the recipe says something around 5 pounds or so. Yeah, 5 pounds boneless short ribs. You can smell it in here. It just smells so wonderful. You want anybody to think that you've been cooking all day in the kitchen? Throw a little bit of garlic and onions in a pan, heat it up, and boy, it sure makes everything smell great. I'm going to go ahead and add my bay leaves now. We're going to hit it with the tomato paste next. We're going to let that tomato paste kind of caramelize on the bottom of the pan and on the vegetables. So I'm going to stir it around, make sure it kind of coats the vegetables, but more importantly, you want it to hit the bottom of the pan and start kind of caramelizing a little bit. That's going to create some more brown bits at the bottom of your pan, so when you hit it with the red wine, and typically with red wine, when you're using that, you would reduce it down till it was almost dry. Here we're going to reduce it just kind of by an eighth. You want to keep that nice, rich red wine flavor. And I'm actually just going to add a few more garlic cloves. I know it says 4 sprigs of fresh thyme. I'm just going to grab some and kind of throw it in there. There was one steakhouse I worked at, as you can see here. Some of that tomato paste is already kind of sticking, so I'm going to move my pan a little bit so more of the surface is getting some heat. But we used to sous vide our short ribs. We'd brown it like this, and we'd put it in a bag, red wine, just a tiny bit of sugar. I don't prefer sugar in mine. The red wine has plenty. We'd throw a few garlic cloves, some fresh thyme. We'd seal the bag, and then we'd cook it overnight. Real slow and low, 169 degrees for 18 hours. These here typically are going to take about 3 hours. Again, depends on how much collagen is in your short rib and how much fat is in there. But there's so much collagen in there, and why it takes so long is it takes a while for that to break down. So if you see that again, it's already gotten some more color to it. Just very shortly, we're going to go ahead and add our red wine. I'm going to add just a little bit more oil. The parsley and lemon zest at the end is kind of a personal preference. It's optional. You don't have to finish with it. It just gives it a little depth of like freshness. It kind of pops in your mouth a little more. Okay, so if you see all those brown bits down there, we're going to go ahead and deglaze with our red wine. And we're going to scrape that bottom off and get all that lovely, what us chefs call love, from the bottom of the pan. So just put it in a little bit at a time. You put too much in, it's going to cool down your pan, and you're really not going to get your brown bits off. That's why they call it kind of a deglazing. You'll do it a little bit at a time. See, as you can see there, I went ahead and I got all those brown bits off the bottom. Well, so now I'm just going to go ahead and add all of my red wine. I'm going to let that reduce by about a quarter. And then we're going to go ahead and add the beef broth. I'm going to transfer everything to my hotel pan. And at this point you can throw, I know it's not in the recipe, but I prefer it than adding more fresh ground pepper or any more. So I'm going to add just a little bit of peppercorns. That way it doesn't make your sauce or your gravy kind of foggy. You'll have a really nice, clear, finished product. So you can see right there, we have some really nice color going on, some really nice flavors. Oh my goodness, this is going to be so delicious. Leftovers makes a really good sandwich. You just shred it up, put a little sauce on there, warm up your sauce, make a nice little hot sandwich for the next day. I think we're probably good there, really. Go ahead and add my beef broth. Now I'm going to transfer these to my hotel pan. And you'll want to put the bone side up because it's more important that you have your short rib meat, the meat part of it, down submerged all the way. So I'm just going to go ahead and line those in my hotel pan there, bone side up. And again, that bone marrow is going to come out of those bones and create some really a lot of love in your broth. And then we're just going to pour all of our juice right over the top. Make sure it is submerged. You could have a little bit of the bone kind of peeking out the side, but you want to make sure that your meat is definitely submerged all the way into the broth. So get one more in there. I hope you all have enjoyed our cooking classes so far. We do miss our regular cooking classes in the season and in our summertime, where all of our residents get together and watch all of our chefs do demonstrations. I'm going to add just a few more fresh thyme sprigs right in the pan. It's not necessary to actually wait for this to come to a boil, because you're going to put it in a 275-degree oven. I do recommend, if you are using your Dutch oven, that you put a little bit of parchment paper or wax paper over the top, and then put your lid on. That's going to help your juices from evaporating from any of the side seals. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my flame off. We're going to go ahead and add all this lovely broth and all those lovely aromatic vegetables. There we go. Oh my goodness, it smells so wonderful. I do wish we had the smell-o-vision, as Emerald says. And there you have it, folks. I'm going to give it I'm going to check them in about 2.5 to 3 hours. You don't want to overcook the short ribs or anything you're braising, for that matter. There is a difference between shreddable meat and meat that just kind of mushes. So the texture in the mouth, you don't want it to be all kind of mushy. And I'll admit, I've done that once or twice, but I've never served it. Just got to start over at that point. There you have it, folks, and we'll see you in a few hours. Thank you so much, and I'll be coming back shortly. Thanks, bye. Okay, folks, we're back. The short ribs are hot out of the oven. I'm going to go ahead and unwrap them. And there's the parchment paper I was telling you about. You want to put that as a barrier in between that, or at least saran wrap in between your short ribs and your tin foil. If you don't, good chances the acids that are in the from the tomato and all the sauce, it's gonna eat through your tin foil. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull my short ribs out nice and gently. We're gonna put it aside. And this is how I like to test my short ribs. You can see that the bone, you can see that they shrank quite a bit, and that the bone is now protruding through the ends. Kind of tells you that they're going to be done. But I always like to take a fork and do a little pull test. And if it pulls away, you should be able to shred this real easy with a fork. But it should not be real mushy. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the rest of these out of here and just set them aside as we strain the rest of the broth. We're going to go ahead and pull the fresh thyme and bay leaves off the top. And your carrots, celery, and onions did their job, so we're just going to go ahead and discard this, the carrot, celery, and onion. It turned out beautiful. The smell is amazing. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how much oil ended up being in here. We're going to skim that oil off, bring the broth to a simmer, and then we're going to thicken it with a little bit of cornstarch and water, also known as a slurry. Those are just beautiful, beautiful short ribs. There's a couple onions or whatnot, stuck to the short ribs that would just be fine. As you can see, you don't end up with a lot of sauce. There's even going to be less after we skim the fat off. So I'm using what we call in the kitchen world a chinois. It's a really fine strainer. You could also use your good old cheesecloth. So we're just going to pour this in there. And instead of discarding the fat, you could use that instead of butter or oil and make your roux. Roux is essentially any fat mixed with flour. I personally, with a dish like this, I like to use the cornstarch slurry, and that's because it gives it a nice shine. If you use the roux, then you're gonna it's gonna give it like a lighter color. This is gonna keep the slurry is gonna keep the color to it. Right now, I'm just each time I tap this, it flexes the little mesh strainer and gently lets the liquids come through. Sometimes in the kitchen you'll see chefs or cooks use one of these and push their juices through, but that will actually push quite a bit of it'll mash the carrots, the celery, the onions, and it'll give you kind of a foggy broth. You want to try and avoid that. As you can see right here, that's little bits of the carrot coming out. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I'm going to go ahead and discard the leftovers. I wish I had a full class right now because boy, it sure smells good. Okay, now I'm going to use my ladle and we're going to go ahead and skim off this fat. And there's quite a bit of fat. I wish you could see this live. And that fat would make a great roux. When I'm doing my big parties for you guys, I do that quite often. Is I will use my drippings and I'll separate the juice from the fat, and I'll turn my fat into a roux. You're probably kind of familiar with that when you're doing your turkey gravy. That's exactly how I do my turkey gravy. And these short ribs took a little bit longer than the recipe said. They took about 4 hours. So there's all the fat. There is a little bit more, but I'm not too concerned about that. It's just going to add a little more flavor. I'm going to set that aside. We're going to go and turn on my burner. We're going to bring it to a boil, turn it down to a simmer. Go ahead and put a lid on there. While I'm waiting for that to come up to temp, I'm going to go ahead and mix my slurry. So slurry is pretty much equal parts cornstarch and water. %of the time I don't really measure that out. I just kind of eyeball it a little bit. So you just want to stir that up until it looks like a bowl of milk. And like I said, you could use arrowroot potato starch in the same manner. You could also make a slurry with flour and water also. So it doesn't have to just be cornstarch. It's just the most commonly known. Okay. So as you can see, that's to a nice boil. While that's boiling, I'm actually going to go ahead and skim off the rest of that fat right off the top here. You'll see it's kind of foaming. I don't know how well you can see inside the pot. I'm trying to have it angled so you can see in there. And there you have it. There's the remainder of the fat. Now, you could also just reduce this down until it's nice and thick. I don't like to do that too much just because of the fact that I like a little bit extra sauce, a little bit extra gravy. So I'm going to go ahead and just stir this slurry in, and you'll see it thicken pretty quickly. I'm going to turn the flame down to a simmer. Just let that cornstarch thicken for a little bit. I'm going to set this aside, and instead of green beans like I prior mentioned, we're going to go ahead and serve this with fresh sauteed broccoli and carrots. A little bit of red onion. And there you go, folks. We have a really nice silky sauce. Go ahead and get started with the vegetable. I'm not sure if a lot of you out there do a lot of sauteed vegetables, but I'm going to show you how I like to do them in small batches. We're going to garnish with a little bit of fresh thyme as opposed to the parsley. So what I like to do is I like to get my pan. I just like to get it nice and hot. Okay, got a little bit of fresh garlic. Some butter. We're going to go ahead and get started with the carrots. And we're going to go ahead and add the broccoli on top of the carrots. Carrots will start getting a little bit of color. Now the reason I'm just kind of waiting and letting it heat up a little more is I'm going to hit it with a little bit of water to start steaming them, and just a little. Then I'm going to put a lid on it, let them cook for a little bit, and then I'm going to finish it with some butter. Okay, now I'm going to put my garlic right on top. I did not include this in the recipe next to the short rib. Figure it's pretty simple enough. Okay, just a tiny bit of oil just to coat. Okay, now we're going to hit it with water. You can see that smoking really hot. We're starting to get a little bit of color on the carrots. And then I'm going to cover it up and just let it steam. Oh, almost forgot. For a little bit of color, a little bit of flavor, I got a little bit of red onion. I just love a little bit of onion. Okay. Okay, folks. Just give that a little more saute. As you can see, a lot of the water is already evaporated. Going to make the vegetables just nice and al dente. Of course, if you want it softer, add a little bit more water, cook them more. I like my vegetables nice and al dente. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of salt and pepper. And now I'm going to go ahead and finish it with the butter. It was about 2.5 tablespoons of butter. I love my butter. Fat is flavor. That's what butter is. And to garnish this, I'm just going to pull off some of the fresh thyme leaves. Go on the opposite direction as they grow. And you'll just get a nice little set of fresh thyme leaves. I feel it adds a little more flavor than just the parsley. And most of the time you'll buy these little packets of fresh thyme and not much more use for it. So we're just going to garnish a little there. I hear my butter, I hear my vegetables sizzling away. Just going to give it another quick toss. See all that butter there? I'm going to turn off the heat and we're all done. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and plate this up. When I make my mashed potatoes, everybody does it a little different. I use a little white pepper, salt, more butter than cream, but I add a little bit of heavy cream. Okay, we're going to go ahead and plate this up, and I'm going to use 2 spoons. And make a nice little quenelle is what they're called. Looks kind of like a little football. Okay, we're going to just put that right in the center of the plate there. Got one of these really nice short ribs. They are just so tender. So tender. Okay. And then you have that nice bone showing. What a great presentation. Go ahead and just use the tongs, and we're going to serve it up with a little bit of broccoli. Go on the outside with the broccoli and carrots, a little bit of red onion. Just adds a little more flavor, a little more color to your dish. You can feel the carrots and the broccoli are still nice and al dente. And there we go. Now for the sauce. Just a nice generous ladle right over the top there. See a nice shine. Put it all over the potato if you'd like, but I kind of like my presentation without making everything look the same. And we're going to take those fresh thyme leaves. Just give it a little sprinkle on top. A little bit on the plate. And there you have it, folks. Fresh beef bone-in short ribs. Braised for 4 hours. Thanks again. Look forward to doing another class for you coming up in January. Thank you so much and have a Merry Christmas.